about some hippie pictures? With communes and hippie lifestyles bringing images of new tastes of freedom and adventure into the mainstream pop culture eyeglass, kids all over the country wanted to emulate in some degree what was happening in places such as in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco to their own cities and towns. The world we knew was transforming into a non-stop carnival of exotic clothes, mini-skirts, long hair, and men growing overnight beards. Sinners and saints morphing into gurus and explorers of beyond all fringes. Eclectic gypsy caravans of freaks pursuing new fringes of expanded consciousness and lifestyles. Raleigh was no exception. Rural areas outside of town, such as Millbrook, provided cheap rentals for party houses. The college neighborhood of town had side streets where old homes were being rented and turned into hippie pads of ongoing parties and happenings. It was here where a group of us were able to rent an inexpensive old 3-story Victorian home with 10 bedrooms, which was rumored to have once been an upscale brothel frequented often by politicians and bankers. With lots of help, it was about $100 a month for 10 bedrooms. But the roaches were fun. The rats were never ordered, but with lots of help from our friends, we cleaned the floors and walls, put up psychedelic posters and tapestries, and soon were blasting music and having parties. Runaway teenagers and eclectically strange street philosophers often wandered through during our short-lived 6-week stay. 6 weeks we lasted. Couldn't take the cockroaches after a while, but this was what happened. The finale came one night when I was startled to hear someone shout, "Hey Douvris, I think I see your mother and uncle hiding outside in the bushes." Sure enough, when I looked out the window, I saw my mother standing behind my Uncle Chris, who was crouched in a surveillance pose with a flashlight in his hand. Further behind them was another more ominous number of people who soon would be heading up our stairs. With hardly a knock or search permit, the door flew open and in came at least a dozen cops and men in suits who identified themselves as Vice Squad members. My mother was under the impression that dirty hippies had kidnapped her son and thus were able to lead the police to where they claimed I was being held. The 9 of us that were in the house at the time were put up against the wall, and as the house itself thoroughly searched. Not having access to cannabis at that time of life, the best we could do to get high was smoking Lipton tea joints mixed with catnip and dried banana peels. Truly. And we thought we got stoned, but anyway. One of these joints was discovered in the search, which led Officer Julius Nipper to proudly declare, "You boys are in big, big trouble." And as he held the joint and declared, "This stuff will make you crazy and dead," we couldn't help ourselves from laughing out loud. Nipper put on a wide smile and reminded us that once the substance was examined at the police lab, we were all heading for a long stay in jail, while he would be getting a nice promotion. In retrospect, even though we were thrown out by the landlord, there was some satisfaction that Officer Nipper did not make the headlines. In fact, he was probably demoted from head of the Raleigh Vice Squad and relocated in some other minor division such as sewer inspection for his arrogance and cost to the state. Not too many weeks after moving out of this hippie house, I found myself crashing one night at a young widow's house on the same Ash Avenue street where our short-lived commune had been. By now I had been learning how to juggle my time between school, staying at home, but also fully attentive to where the action presented itself. In this case, no romance had been involved yet. However, while sitting with this pretty lady on the same couch and casually enjoying conversation and a cold beer, the door burst open, and in launched my mother, screaming like a banshee in loud Greek, "Putana! Putana!" while trying to pull the girl's hair out. Not needing the meaning of the translation of horror, it was the best last time I would see this understandably terrified lady as I more or less carried my mother out of the apartment. The lessons here were plenty. Besides the cultural abyss between myself and family, I learned to start leaving my car parked far away from my snooping, toxic-minded parents. Anyway, there was a lot more. You can read that on your own. I think I have time, so I'll go a little bit more. This had to do with a peace march to Washington, D.C., and with me was a friend who was a Korean War veteran. Jim and I were pretty determined that whatever happened, the message in Washington to deliver was about peace, and we would not join the ranks of any extremists. The main demonstration itself felt very much akin to that point of view. Over 1 million of us marched, and we were greeted by people that drove by and were in office buildings with non-stop peace signs. We felt as if we were victorious peace heralds, and the world was indeed changing towards a more loving society. But as the evening rolled around and the TV cameras pulled their plugs, everything changed. As we were to find out many years later, it was at this point that undercover agent provocateurs started leading the passions of the crowd towards more violent directions and into the hands of the prepared police, National Guard, and Army troops. Tear gas was being tossed at us, and it became frightfully clear that we were being set up as innocent sheep to a slaughter. Jim had a flashback to his Army days and immediately smashed a glass bottle that he found and stated, "I came for peace, and now it's war." His peace sign fingers thus formed a fist of power instead as he charged through the front lines toward the soldiers. I lost track of him at that point as my own determination to survive guided my young legs to run to the public park at DuPont Circle. President Nixon's stormtroopers had anticipated our escape route and quickly encircled the area and started throwing more tear gas canisters and bashed heads with their clubs. By some good grace, I found a narrow way out of the trap and ran for a few blocks trying to get air into my lungs. As I was coughing with a few other people standing next to a wall, a police car pulled up. We threw our hands up in the air with a clear surrender message, but the cops threw a tear gas canister at us nonetheless. I remember it landing on top of a girl standing next to me, and then her head gushed out a wet flow of blood. At the same moment, someone pulling me into an adjacent basement apartment. There we took quick turns in the shower, getting the life-threatening toxins out of our lungs and eyes. We learned that justice had a blind eye when it comes to threatening some vested interests of money and power in America. So that was impactful. I'm going to jump to something else. My parents at this time were pretty much giving up on me, so they had to go for hardcore. They bought me a ticket to Greece. They figured growing up in Greece in the 1930s, realistically Greece would still be a social climate like it was in 1930s, and I would go there and shave my head and get a suit and go to church and be a good fellow. But they didn't realize that 1969 was a time where the whole world was adapting to new ways of life. So this is taking place on an island called Rhodes, where I just come out of a disco and I met a lot of interesting people. Feeling in top form and invincible, I was happily humming on my late night walk back to the hotel. As in Athens, my happiness was interrupted by another three-wheeled Gestapo vehicle. Again, I was mistaken as a counter-revolutionary, and this time threatened with arrest for violating a late-night curfew. Luckily, I was able to convince these thugs that I was an American citizen and had the right to walk freely without such hourly limitations. Contemplating the situation, and after realizing that I was fluent in Greek, English, and some German, they then threatened arresting me, but would refrain from doing so if I agreed to be their interpreter on their quest to pick up foreign girls still in the streets during these after hours. I remember these things, they're horrible. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, I humbly agreed to go along with their offer. For the next few early morning hours, I felt myself an imbecile for talking to girls out of the car window and explaining to them that I wanted them to meet these charming, narrow little men in the car who would be smiling coyly while twirling their mustaches and imagining themselves to be Clark Gables. At least I was able to avoid getting slapped by explaining to the girls in a language the cops could not understand that I was being forced to be in this situation. Still, I didn't feel they had much sympathy for me, and several times I was told to fuck off. Finally, the long-lasting night turned into dawn, and the cops wanted to reward my efforts by taking me out for a breakfast of goat cheese omelets and fresh squeezed orange juice. Thinking we were now friends, they encouraged me to meet them again at the same time and place where we would team up to find some horny tourist girls together. As I shook hands in agreement, my mind was already planning on getting on the first ferry boat back to Athens the next day. Do I have time for one more?
Is it a short one?
It's a quick one.
All right, one more.
Okay.
You gotta leave one more, you know.
This is it. This is the last one. I wound up in San Francisco after I finished college, and I was looking for a job, and my diplomas were worthless, so I got a job at Ripley's Believe It or Magic. So, anyway, not wanting to be discouraged or waiting too long for a steady paycheck, I then decided to go to the touristy section of town and start applying at shop after shop for a job. Even after filling our tons of applications and hearing the same promise of we'll call you if we need you, not too many doors were opening to my future. Having a college degree was now more of a handicap, as these minimum wage shop clerk jobs considered me overeducated and not too reliable as a permanent employee. After about a week of searching, I finally found my first steady job in San Francisco at Ripley's Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. As I wasn't talented enough to demonstrate card deck tricks at the museum's gift shop, my duties consisted of keeping a glass display case polished and walking around touristy Fisherman's Wharf with a black cape passing out advertisements. I would grab their kids when they saw me and tell them never to take anything from that evil man. I would take off the phony teeth and say, look, that never worked. Such moments were difficult for my sense of pride, as I would want to shout back that I was just a flunky doing my job, but clear focus dictated that I should remain patient or else I would be fired. And as lousy as the job was, I still was able to walk around in the clean air and flirt with girls in other shops. I was even able to educate myself on magic by reading the display cases, including details about the life of Aleister Crowley and other such personalities associated with the dark side. But life got better. I got a job at a restaurant, and at that restaurant I met my wife, who's sitting out there, and that was like 42 years ago, and it's been happily.
A lot more adventures.
Did you see this one? Did you see this one? Oh,
Yeah, a lot more adventures. Just imagine that's just a warm-up, guys.